Transgenderism, A Search for Biological Ties by Ashley Hansen. Much of Western society becomes very divided over the topic of transgender individuals. Currently, transgenderism is classified as a mental health condition. According to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, also known as the DSM-5, transgenderism is diagnosed as gender dysphoria. The diagnosis involves a difference between one's experienced and expressed gender and assigned gender, which results in significant distress or problems functioning. It is because of this diagnosis and the societal backlash and rejection, it is important to research if in fact transgenderism is a biological condition that occurs in the womb. Research of the possible biological factors that create a transgender identity is crucial for reducing the highly stigmatizing labels and discrimination these individuals face. The discovery of the biological factors may create an embracing of these individuals into society. It is interesting as other societies accept and cherish individuals who identify as being transgender, in which these individuals are seen as being two spirits and highly connected to religious practices and beliefs. So we can see that's almost completely opposite from that of Western culture. Continued research of the topic of transgenderism and its biological ties has multifactorial benefits and connects many lines of disciplines. So first, early identification of transgenderism in uteral development. So that's going to connect the lines in the disciplines of biology, genetics, even theology, and child development. It's also important for the increased physical and mental health access of transgendered individuals, which will cover the disciplines of healthcare, social work, psychiatry, and even education. The increased societal acceptance and inclusion of those who identify as being transgender, will cover the lines of disciplines of sociology, social structures, even marriage and the family, as many individuals who identify as being transgender are often rejected by their families and significant others. So here we're going to go into the literature review. The authors of this research hypothesized that gender identity is a multifactorial complex trait with a heritable polygenic component, meaning that it's hereditary. A study of family and twin studies shows significant and consistent evidence for the role of innate genetic factors in the development of cisgender and transgender identities. A negligible role for shared environmental factors and a small potential role for unique environmental factors. Heritability estimates are consistent with other behavioral and personality traits. Review of this article discovered partial evidence that gender identity and socially defined gender constructs may be influenced in part by innate factors, including genes. So this kind of touched on the search for a biological tie. So with this article, research suggested that transgender people face high levels of discrimination in society, which may contribute to their disproportionate risk for poor health. Data was collected from the largest survey of transgender adults in the United States. The method that was used in this research was the National Transgender Discrimination Survey. The survey provided qualitative data and examined the associations among gender nonconformity, transphobic discrimination, and health-harming behaviors, examples of attempted suicide, drug and alcohol abuse, and smoking. The results of the study suggested that gender nonconforming trans people face more discrimination and are more likely to engage in health-harming behaviors than trans people who are gender conforming. The research highlights the important role of gender nonconformity in the social experiences and well-being of transgender people. Recognition of the non-human, the psychological minefield of transgender inequality in the law. The researchers of this explored the psychological impact felt by transgender individuals when ongoing discrimination and violence against them is too often misunderstood, ignored, and perhaps perpetuated by legislature and the judiciary. The author further focuses on two major areas of trans experience, one being pre-transition. Transgender individuals feel an enormous split between how they feel inside and how their body represents them. The second was the post-transition. Transgender individuals are often surrounded by hate and ignorance within society, and as you can see, I was able to locate an image of a transition from maybe an M to F, which means male to female. That this study took more of a theoretical approach, hence hermeneutic phenomenology, which is more theoretical methodology for obtaining data. So moving on, individuals participated in open-ended interviews designed to tap their lived experience with transgenderism as a valued aspect of life. Transcribed interview data were analyzed using hermeneutic phenomenological processes as suggested by various researchers in nursing, social work, and other disciplines. Results suggested that intimate connections with oneself, with others, and with a larger purpose constituted the essence of the lived experience of appreciating one's transgenderism. So because this one was more of a theoretical approach to data collection and interpretation of the data by a lived experience point of view, I also included a theoretical image of I think, therefore I am. Author Alicia Fritz wrote her article, Social Demography of Health-Seeking Experiences Among Transgender African Americans. Transgender people often have a negative health-seeking experience that give way to the many health disparities seen in transgender communities. So the research method that was used was the social ecological model, multiple logistic regression, secondary data from the 2010 National Transgender Discrimination Survey were also used, yielding a sample size of 253 transgender African Americans. The results for this study, correlations existed between socioeconomic, health behaviors, and sociocultural variables in 6 measures of health-seeking experiences among transgender African Americans. In conclusion, exploring the aspects of transgenderism in healthcare has the potential for positive social impact, as results from the study could improve the lives of transgender African Americans by combating transphobia among health professionals and promoting culturally competent healthcare. So now we're going to go into the methods section, and first I engaged in field research. So a quick description is field research refers to the gathering of primary data from a natural environment without doing a lab experiment or survey. In conducting this field research, I was able to volunteer and attend the first ever Hemet Pride event. The duration of this event and my volunteer work spanned over 5 hours. The location of the event was held at the historic Hemet Theater on June 14th, 2018. The event was made possible through NAMI Mount San Jacinto, the local chapter of National Alliance on Mental Illness, the MESA Cultural Competency Program and Community Advocacy for Gender and Sexuality Issues, also known as CAGSI LGBTQ Task Force, and Riverside University Healthcare Systems Behavioral Health. The purpose of the event was to introduce main speakers who provided their own lived experience and views of being connected with or identifying as being LGBTQ. So also I want to highlight that LGBTQ stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and questioning. Researcher focused data collection from individuals who identified as transgender and or their parent caregiver. Researcher was able to have conversations and analyze lived experiences and or opinions of over 15 transgendered individuals and their family members. The ages of these transgender individuals range from very young children to even the elderly or aged adults. Throughout the event, researchers listened attentively as each person shared their unique strengths, hardships, and community outreach efforts. Although every person who was transgender, either M to F, meaning male to female, or F to M, female to male, all shared having felt like the opposite of their assigned gender from very young ages, which I would like to highlight. Each one of them identified as being opposite of their assigned gender from between the ages of 3 to 8 years old. Each began the transition and gender reassignment at different ages, and I even met one woman who didn't actually transition into being a female until she was 60. The method of utilizing field research was most beneficial to obtaining data related to the question of, is there a biological factor for transgenderism? As this researcher could observe that more than half of the participants in attendance of the event identified as transgender, and there could have been more, but you can't tell unless they tell you. When somebody has been fully transitioned, you wouldn't know just by the first glance or even in talking with them that they were transgender individuals. So there may have been more in attendance who I did not directly have a conversation with who were transgender. A researcher observed that every time someone shared having known they internally identified as the opposite gender as young as 3 years old, there were both verbal and nonverbal validation from others, including family members. This reaction of agreement and identification conveyed an understanding across the current population that being transgender had a biological factor and was not merely a personal choice. Many parents also shared having realized their child was different since they were babies. Secondary data. All obtainment of secondary data collection consisted of reliable, peer-reviewed journals located in the Anne Gabriel Library, accessed and provided by California Baptist University. Researcher located and read all obtained studies at length to collect data and statistics of already published studies on transgenderism. Secondary data collection revealed a study by Polderman, TJ et al. That suggests studies of twins show significant and consistent evidence for the role of innate genetic factors in the development of cisgender and transgender identities. All other peer-reviewed articles highlight the interpersonal discrimination, institutional discrimination with examples to healthcare, education, and employment, and stigmatizing governmental inequalities with punishing laws and policies. So, limitations to my research. In attending the Hemet Pride event, I actually went in with a preconceived notion that there would be little to no parental and or familiar support for those who identified as LGBTQ. In discovering there was much more support and validation for the transgendered experience of having knowledge of being opposite of their assigned gender from a very young age, this researcher must acknowledge that many may not share their true opinions on whether being transgender is a biological factor or a choice, as these family members are in full support. This may hinder the ability to share honestly about their own experience as a caregiver, because you don't want to share thinking, yeah, I think that my family member just made the choice to be transgender, because you don't want to hurt their perspective or their unique experience. And also, we don't know. There isn't research out there that can validate whether it is biological or environmental. So with the secondary data collection, that revealed there is little to no reliable research with regards to the possible biological factors that indicate transgenderism is a result of abnormal gestational processes during fetal development. And ultimately, that was the question I was trying to answer. So the analysis of the data. Secondary data reveals there is little to no research that validates the theory that transgendered identities are a result of biological and hormonal exposure during gestation. Polderman, TJ et al. Revealed only partial evidence that gender identity and socially defined gender constructs may be influenced in part by innate factors including genes. The research conducted by Burge 2015 identified that hermeneutic phenomenology of transgenderism as a valued life experience among transgender individuals, and that this methodology is significant in understanding the population. Now, I want to highlight this one for a second because, again, this is more of a theoretical approach to the scientific method of data collection, because it's more recognizing the personal lived experience of those who identify as transgender and utilizing that data collection in a theoretical way that increases the discipline. Field research revealed an overall consensus that those who identified as being transgender knew they were of the opposite gender than the one assigned at birth, since they were very young. Caregivers reported having known their child identified as the opposite gender beginning as children. Both secondary and field research highlight the need for the increase of transgender research as to improve all life domains of the transgender individual, examples of the physical and mental health care, familiar bonds, social ties, and inclusivity. All who attended the Hemet Pride event, regardless of sex or gender identification, highlighted the most important piece of data, that gender is internal, not external, and has nothing to do with sexual orientation. That was a reoccurring theme all throughout the Pride event. So in conclusion, although this research was unable to obtain longitudinal studies conducted to validate the biological factors of transgenderism, field research did reveal the personal experiences of those who identify as being transgender to have known since they were children that their identity was that of the opposite gender of their physical body, which in turn resulted in mental health diagnosis of gender dysphoria. Secondary research further acknowledges the importance that all disciplines play in the unique physical and mental health, societal, and familiar challenges faced by transgender individuals. Secondary data collection did not reveal the biological connection of transgenderism. It does, however, shed an in-depth understanding of the structural and societal institutions that perpetuate the increased negative health disparities and discrimination of transgender individuals, which further explains the importance of scientific research for identifying the biology of transgenderism. Conclusions of the Polderman article suggested that under the polygenic threshold model, contributing factors assume a continuous normal distribution in the population, suggesting that while any two people may have very different phenotypes, example, gender identities, the entire population exists along a single spectrum with no clear divisions. Future research should be focused on discovering unique DNA sequencing, hormonal, and brain imaging of those who are transgender as to locate the biological factors. Longitudinal studies would provide detailed data on the unique needs and experiences of transgender individuals and would thus increase healthcare services, discrimination, and increase inclusivity and acceptance into society. It is through the obtainment of these studies that the importance of conducting future research of the biological factors must be evaluated, as the identification of biological factors may pave the way of reducing the discriminations and mental health challenges faced by this minority population, thus increasing the positive outcomes and healthcare services for transgendered individuals. And here is my reference pages, and I want to thank you for listening to this presentation, and have a very blessed day.